Hello everyone, welcome to Pushpoint. I am your storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you used this video to fall asleep, so before
that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what
time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax.
Story 1. The Keeper of Grey Lake House.
The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Claire arrived at Grey Lake House. It was the sort of rain that dulled the world, not a downpour, but a persistent, cold curtain that muffled everything and blurred the edges of things. Trees dissolved into shadow beyond the hedges. The gravel of the driveway soaked through her shoes, and her suitcase was already soaked through by the time she reached the front steps.
The house loomed above her, 3 stories, stone walls furred with moss, and windows like dark eyes.
A single light was on in the hallway. The rest was cloaked in damp silence. She hadn't expected it to be so empty. Her aunt's letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, written in a tight, spidery hand. Come quickly.
The house needs a keeper now. It's been too long untended. That was all it had said.
Claire had no living relatives left but her aunt, and yet, when she knocked and then pushed open the heavy front door, there was no answer. There inside the house was still. It smelled of mildew and faint wood smoke, as if a fire had been lit weeks ago and never again.
She called her aunt's name Margaret, but only her voice answered her, bouncing dully from the panelled walls.
Claire didn't know why she stayed that first night. Perhaps it was the rain, perhaps it was the house, which seemed to wrap around her like a heavy blanket, coaxing her into silence.
Or perhaps it was curiosity.
Her aunt had always been strange old family stories hinted at a scandal that had driven Margaret out here, to the edge of the moors.
That night, she found her aunt's bedroom locked. All the other rooms were untouched, draped in sheets, dust blooming in the corners like lichen.
Only the library seemed used, a strange, domed room with a single high window and the constant drip of water into a bucket beneath a leaf. She slept in the servants' quarters. The second night, she heard it, a soft dragging sound above her, like something being pulled across the floor, then footsteps slow, measured, and unmistakable crossing the hallway just above. She lit a candle. The air was icy.
Still, she climbed the stairs.
No one was there. The third night, she began dreaming of her aunt, not as she remembered her, prim and reclusive, but gaunt, with hollow eyes and hands like curled claws. In the dream, she would be standing in the library, pointing to the ceiling, mouthing words Claire couldn't hear.
She awoke with blood on her fingertips and the faint coppery taste of iron in her mouth. She told herself it was a coincidence.
The dreams, the footsteps, the locked room upstairs. But on the 4th day, she found a journal tucked beneath the floorboard in the library.
The entries were erratic, fragmented. Some were Margaret's handwriting,
others spidery, frantic were not.
There is something in the house, one entry read.
Not alive, not dead. It waits upstairs.
It listens through the walls. Claire read for hours. The rain never stopped.
In the margin of one page, her aunt had scrawled, "The keeper must remain,
or it gets out." That night, Claire dreamed again of the library.
Only this time, she was the one standing there, pointing upward,
and someone not her was watching her from the shadows. She awoke to the sound of the locked bedroom door upstairs creaking open.
She didn't go up. Instead, she returned to the journal.
One final page had appeared, though she hadn't noticed it before.
The writing was fresh. It said only, "It needs a voice."
Claire now walks the halls of Grey Lake House in silence, the journal always in her hands.
She no longer questions where her aunt went,
or why the rain never stops.
She doesn't answer the door when someone knocks,
because she is the keeper now,
and something waits upstairs, always listening.
Story 2. The Hollow Room.
The village of Marrow Hollow sat at the bottom of a valley where fog clung like old lace and the sun rarely broke through. There was one road in, cracked and slick with moss, and no road out. The locals never spoke of it that way, but visitors always noticed. Lucas was not a visitor, not exactly.
His mother had been born here, though she left before he was born. After her death, he'd found the deed a house left to her by her grandfather.
The letter that came with it was brief. Come when the sky is grey and the earth is wet. The house will be waiting. So he came. Rain greeted him the moment he arrived.
It wasn't heavy, but relentless. It dripped from the bare branches and trickled down the slate roofs of the cottages. The townsfolk watched him from behind curtains. One woman in the bakery whispered something under her breath when he asked for directions.
He followed the lane past the church, across the weir, and into the trees. The house was at the edge of the wood's squat, long abandoned, its shutters hanging like broken wings. The key for the lock. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of peat and rot. Rain tapped against the windows like fingernails. The rooms were dim, filled with old furniture under sheets, and a thick, oppressive silence, except for the third room upstairs, the hollow room, he would come to call it.
There was nothing in it. No furniture,
no curtains.
The wallpaper was the color of bone, peeling in places.
But the sound was wrong.
When he stepped inside, the echo of his footfalls didn't behave normally. It bounced too slowly, hung in the air too long.
It felt off. That night, he slept in a different room.
But he heard something.
A single knock, not at the door, from inside the house.
The second night, it knocked again.
2 knocks this time, low and deliberate. He searched every wall, floorboard, and corner of the hollow room, but found nothing.
Then came the whispers.
Not full voices. Not at first, just the suggestion of breath behind his ear when he stood too long in the room.
His own name, murmured beneath the rain.
Lucas.
Then silence. He found an old photograph in a drawer downstairs, his mother as a girl, standing in front of the house, beside a man whose eyes had been scratched out.
Written on the back, "The room takes what you bring into it."
Lucas stopped going into the hollow room, but the door began opening on its own.
He would find it ajar in the morning, even after locking it at night. Once, he swore he saw something just past the threshold, not a shape, exactly, but the suggestion of one, like heat rising of pavement. The whispers grew bolder. One night, he woke with the sheets soaked through and muddy footprints across the floor. Rain lashed the windows, but the window in the hollow room was wide open. On the wall beside it, scratched deep into the plaster, were the words, "You came here. That means you're ready."
He tried to leave the next day, but the road was gone.
Not washed out gone. Where it once ran past the weir, there was now only thick forest. The trees loomed close, wet with mist, and no matter how far he walked, he always came back to the house. He began to dream of the hollow room. Each time, he stood inside it, and something stood opposite him.
A tall thing, draped in shadow, without face or voice, only a mouth stitched shut with black twine.
The walls bled down into the floor, and the sky outside turned red. On the 7th night, he found a mirror in the hollow room. It hadn't been there before.
He saw himself in it, but not exactly.
The reflection moved a half-second behind.
When he raised a hand, it delayed. When he spoke, it mouthed back the words silently, and then it smiled.
He covered the mirror, but the cloth fell off each morning. The whispers returned, now louder, now urgent,
and one phrase repeated over and over, always from behind him, always just above a whisper.
The house was never empty.
On the 9th night, he watched himself in the mirror go still while he moved.
It stared at him, then it walked away out of frame, but Lucas was still standing there. When he turned around, the room was empty.
Now the house is still. The rain falls, eternal.
The villagers say they haven't seen Lucas since that night, but the lights in the house still flicker on. Sometimes, if you stand outside, you can hear footsteps pacing in the hollow room, and a voice not quite his calling a name that isn't yours.
Story 3. Below the floorboards.
The cottage at Barrow Fen was cheap, too cheap.
Elena had been searching for a quiet place to write something far from the city, tucked away where she could think.
She didn't ask many questions when the agent mentioned the price, only nodded at the words rustic, remote, peaceful. Rain began the moment she arrived.
It was a flat, steady downpour that veiled the fens in a curtain of grey. Her boots sank in the mud as she unloaded her things.
The cottage itself was squat and long, with narrow windows and a low ceiling, its wood dark with age. She noticed right away how sound behaved strangely here, swallowed quickly, as though the walls were too thick or something behind them was always listening. Inside, the place was furnished sparsely. A single bedroom, a sitting room with a hearth, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of old roots. It was cold, even with the fire. Rain rattled the small windows like fingers tapping from the outside. She unpacked her laptop and a single notebook.
She wouldn't need much else.
This was a retreat, a break from the noise.
Time to start again. That night, she woke to a sound.
Not the rain, not the wind, a creak. A slow, deliberate creak from the center of the sitting room floor. She froze in bed, barely breathing. The creaking stopped. A moment later, it came again, longer this time.
Something shifting,
wood giving way under weight. The next morning, she checked the floor.
Nothing was out of place. But when she pressed her palm flat against the floorboards where the sound had come from, she could feel it, the faintest trace of cold air rising through a seam in the wood. There was something below the floor. She found the hatch on the second day, hidden under the old rug near the hearth.
A square of iron set into the wood, barely distinguishable unless you were looking for it. It had no handle, just a keyhole, and a scent that was not of earth or dust, but something older.
Salt and whetstone.
There was no key. She asked the letting agent about it. He sounded surprised, then evasive.
Old storage, he said, probably bricked over.
Best not to fuss with it.
That night, she dreamed of dripping, a slow trickle of water echoing in an unseen cavern.
And footsteps too far below to be real. Something moving with long, dragging limbs.
When she awoke, the rug had been pushed aside.
The hatch was exposed.
And there, just below the seam, was a smear of wet handprints. She stared at them for a long time.
Over the next days, the cottage changed.
Not all at once.
Subtle things. Furniture shifted slightly when she wasn't looking.
Her reflection in the window lingered a half second too long.
And always at night, the creaking growing closer. At one point, she tried to record it on her phone.
When she played it back, the sound was distorted, stretched, as if something behind the MIC was breathing slow and wet.
Her writing stopped. She couldn't concentrate. Every time she sat down, she felt it, a pressure below her feet, rising through the floor like heat. One night, she snapped and tried to break the hatch open with a hammer. The metal didn't even dent. That same night, the fire wouldn't light. The temperature dropped. Rain lashed the windows harder than before. The wind screamed in long, inhuman vowels. And beneath it all, a knock. Not at the door. From beneath, one knock. Then another.
Then silence.
She tried to leave the next morning, but her car wouldn't start.
The road was impassable, a wash of water and fallen branches. Her phone lost signal. The nearest town was miles away.
That night, she sat in the corner of the sitting room, clutching the hammer, watching the hatch. At 3:12 a.m., it opened. It didn't creak. It didn't groan. It opened, silently. A square of blackness yawning up at her, and from it rose a smell, thick, fetid, humid. The scent of something that had waited too long in the dark. She never saw what climbed out. She remembers only the hand long-fingered, slick with brine, tipped in claws that weren't quite bone or shell.
It reached up, curled over the edge of the hatch, and paused.
Then another.
She backed into the corner. Her throat refused to scream. When the thing rose, it brought the dark with it, not just shadow, but an absence of space, of time, of everything she thought she knew about the world. Then came the voice, deep and dry and full of ages. You brought the silence with you. Now you must stay. Elena was never found. The agent later claimed he never heard from her after the first week. Authorities eventually searched the cottage.
It was empty,
except for a notebook lying near the hearth, its final page scribbled in frantic ink.
It doesn't live below. It waits.
The house keeps it. The rain feeds it. It listens when we forget we're heard. No one rents the cottage at Barrow Fen anymore. Story 4. The Tithing Bell.
They told Amelia not to go to Weatherby Glen in the fall. Locals at the edge of town spoke of the thinning, how the wind carried things not meant to be heard, and how the bell on the old chapel sometimes rang by itself during the rains.
She didn't believe them, of course. She was a folklorist. Superstition was her trade, but not her truth. Still, the idea of Weatherby intrigued her. A vanished village,
a glen swallowed by moss and fog,
an abandoned chapel with no roof and one bell tarnished, hanging and curiously preserved.
The bell was why she came.
It was said to be a tithing bell, once rung only during offerings not of money, but of people. The first time she saw the glen, it was already raining.
The trees were skeletal, their limbs grasping at one another. The path wound down into the hollow like a noose, thick with leaf rot.
She didn't notice how quiet it was until she stepped into the clearing. No birds, no wind.
Only the hush of rain. The chapel stood at the center, crumbling stone walls and a shuttered altar.
And high above, supported by a rusted iron frame, was the bell.
It should not have rung, not with the wind still, not with the ropes rotted to threads.
But it did.
A single, long, sonorous note that vibrated in her chest and made her stomach twist. She backed away. She returned to town that evening, soaked and unsettled. She tried to write it of a trick of acoustics, but the sound stayed with her, in her ears, in her dreams. That night, she awoke with the echo of the bell still vibrating through her bones. The next day, she went back. This time, she brought equipment, a recorder, a camera, filled notebooks.
It rained harder. Water poured between the stones and her breath forked in the air. The bell hung perfectly still, unmoving.
She set the recorder on the altar and walked the perimeter.
When she played back the tape later that night, her own voice sounded distant,
muffled, and beneath it, at minute 6, was the bell ringing again.
And something else.
A whisper.
Faint but unmistakable. One must stay. One must always stay. She didn't sleep the night. She told herself she wouldn't return, but at dawn, she found herself already packing.
On the third visit, she noticed things had changed. The grass around the chapel had blackened in patches. The air was heavier, and the path behind her seemed longer than she remembered. The bell.
It looked newer somehow,
as if it had been polished.
And beside the altar, where no stone had stood before, was a worn, withered plaque. The inscription was barely legible. When the bell rings thrice, the glen is full. She heard the first ring again as she stood reading it.
It was louder this time, almost inside her. She turned to leave, but the path was gone, swallowed by fog. The trees loomed closer than before, their branches arched like reeds. Panic surged through her. She ran, but every direction led back to the chapel.
That night, she huddled in the chapel's ruins. Rain poured through the open ceiling.
Something moved at the edge of the glen, not animals, but figures, tall, still, just watching.
When the bell rang a second time, it was deeper,
more final, and she understood something she hadn't before. It wasn't summoning something. It was counting. 2 rings, 2 warnings.
She didn't sleep. She didn't move from the altar. She kept the bell in her sight.
Just before dawn, the whisper returned. This time, it was clear. 3 rings and the glen must feed. She tried screaming. It was swallowed by the fork. Tried breaking the bell's supports.
The iron was cold and unyielding.
Tried praying.
At sunset, the bell rang a third time, and something answered.
It rose from the glen, not a shape, but a hollow, a presence. Rain bent around it.
Sound died in its shadow. It had no form, only intent, the kind of ancient hunger that had once required offerings to keep it satisfied.
The plaque was true.
When the bell rings thrice, the glen is full, and the price must be paid. She doesn't remember the rest, only that she woke in her motel room with her clothes soaked and the smell of peat clinging to her skin.
The camera was gone. The recorder cracked.
Her field notebook was filled with words she hadn't written.
She stays now. You must ring the bell if you come,
or it will come for you instead.
That was 6 months ago. Since then, others have gone to Weatherby Glen, drawn by legend, by curiosity, by Amelia's incomplete notes.
None have returned, but locals say that on rainy nights, the bell can be heard not once, not twice, but 3 times, and after the 3rd ring, the rain always falls harder.
As if something has been fed,
or is still hungry. Story 5. The House That Waits. Eli had never believed in ghosts.
He considered himself grounded, methodical.
After 10 years of restoring historical homes for wealthy clients, he'd learned to treat strange noises as old pipes, cold spots as insulation issues, and whispers as nothing more than creaking wood and wishful thinking.
So when the Armitage estate came into his hands cheap, overgrown, half swallowed by ivy and fog, he chalked it up to another overlooked treasure in a forgotten corner of the countryside.
The house had been empty since 1911. No record of its last occupants.
The real estate agent hadn't stepped foot inside and handed Eli the keys without a word. On the first day, he stood at the edge of the gravel drive, staring up at the house. It wasn't grand, but it was tall, too tall.
3 stories of narrow windows and steep gables. The slate roof jutting like broken teeth into the grey sky. Rain pattered softly, steady as breath.
The trees loomed close, branches brushing the attic windows like fingers. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt expectant. Inside, time had stopped. Dust hung thick in the air, but the furniture remained untouched. A piano in the parlor, keys yellowed but perfectly in tune.
A child's shoes beside the staircase, and in the hallway, a clock that ticked, though Eli never found where it was wound.
He made a list.
Leaks, mold, rotting beams, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone.
Every time he turned his back, something shifted. Not big things, a door slightly ajar, a chair angled differently, but enough. The second night, he found a room that wasn't there before. A narrow space behind the kitchen, hidden behind a false panel. Bare stone walls, a cot.
A metal basin stained with something old.
On the floor, scratched into the stone with frantic energy.
Do not open the upper room. He hadn't seen an upper room.
The third floor was locked, every door sealed shut. No visible keyholes.
He hadn't thought much of it, until he heard the dragging. It came in the middle of the night. A slow, dull scrape across the floor above him.
Back and forth, back and forth. Not like footsteps, more like something pulling its weight. The sound stopped when he moved. He told himself it was animals.
Maybe water shifting wood. He climbed to the second floor, tried the stairs to the third.
Still locked,
still cold.
He started having dreams of the house breathing.
Walls expanding and contracting like lungs. Floorboards twitching like nerves.
He dreamed of looking out the attic window and seeing himself, standing in the rain, staring up. The morning after the third dream, he woke with his boots wet and muddy. On the 5th night, he finally found the attic door ajar, just slightly, just enough to suggest it had never been locked.
Upstairs, there was only one room.
It was utterly silent.
The kind of silence that bruises your ears.
Rain lashed the window, but the sound didn't penetrate the room.
Dust lay thick, untouched, except in the far corner, where something had moved recently, dragging marks in the dust that led to a large wardrobe.
He didn't want to open it,
but he did.
It was empty, until he looked up. Something hung from the ceiling, a shape curled into itself.
Thin, pale, long-fingered.
It didn't move, but he felt its eyes open inside his chest. He backed out, closed the wardrobe, and didn't go back.
He tried to leave the house,
but his car wouldn't start.
The road was flooded, though no rain had fallen for hours.
His phone showed no signal. He walked for an hour and found himself at the gate again. The house didn't let him go. Now, the upper room opens itself at night. The dragging comes closer. Sometimes he wakes to find muddy handprints on the hallway walls.
Or the wardrobe door ajar.
The cot in the hidden room has been used. He doesn't remember sleeping there, but his body aches like he has. The piano plays at night. A single lullaby he doesn't recognize. Over and over again.
He found another message scratched into the cellar wall.
It watches until you forget you are watched. It waits until you forget it is waiting. He doesn't know what he's forgetting, but sometimes when he looks into the mirror, the reflection is a moment late or smiling when he's not.
And once, he swore he saw the upper room behind him, even though he was standing in the parlor. Eli no longer tries to leave.
The house doesn't let him.
And worse, part of him no longer wants to. Somewhere above him, the wardrobe creaks open.
And the house that waits begins to breathe again.
Story 6. The well at Whispers Hollow.
They said it was bottomless.
Not metaphorically.
Not in the way people exaggerate such things. The well in Whispers Hollow had no bottom. No echo when you dropped a stone. No splash. It simply went down. Forever. Celia had never been to the hollow before. The village didn't appear on maps anymore, though records showed it had once supported a few hundred people,
mostly miners and their families.
The mines had closed after an accident in the late 1800s, and one by one, the families vanished.
No one knew what happened to them.
She came in the rain, drawn by a brief mention of the place in a half-burned journal she found in a second-hand shop. The author had written,
"It speaks now, from the deep black. It wants out. It wants up. The well breathes when you're not looking."
The journal had no name, no ending, just those lines, and a charcoal sketch of a small clearing ringed with stone.
She found the hollow on her third day in the woods.
There was no path, just instinct and something else, a pressure behind the eyes, a tug behind the ribs.
It pulled her to the place as if she'd always known where to go. The rain was steady when she reached the well. It sat at the center of the hollow.
A ring of pale stone, older than any house, crusted with moss and cracked at the edges.
No bucket, no rope, just a black mouth in the earth.
The trees around it leaned inward, as if listening. She approached and peered over the edge. Nothing, just velvet dark and the faintest suggestion of movement, like mist twisting far below. No sound but the rain dripping on leaves and the faint gusts of wind brushing the hollow. She dropped a coin in.
No sound,
no bottom.
That night, she dreamed of the well.
Not standing above it, but within it, drifting down, deeper and deeper, as the walls pulsed and pulsed, like flesh remembering its shape.
There was something far below, crouched and grinning, humming with hunger. When she woke, her ears rang.
She couldn't remember why she'd come. Only the world remained clear. She went back the next morning. This time, she brought rope, tied it to a tree.
Lowered a microphone, then a small flashlight.
The recorder caught nothing.
No sound.
Not even ambient wind.
But when she reviewed the flashlight footage, the beam flickered.
And then, at 27 feet, something moved, just past the edge of the light. A smooth, pale surface, then gone. She should have left.
She should have burned the footage.
Instead, she stayed another night.
At 2:33 a.m., she heard it.
Not the well, not her imagination. A whisper,
faint, urgent, just outside her tent. A dry voice, like paper rubbed against stone.
"Let me see." She opened the tent. No one there, just the well, faintly visible in the moonlight, a soft mist rising from its mouth.
She should have run, but she didn't.
She whispered back, "What are you?" No answer.
But she heard the rope dragging,
slowly,
as if something had taken hold of the end she'd left dangling into the well.
The next day, the rope was gone, severed at the base. She returned to town, tried to speak to someone, anyone, but no one remembered Whisper's Hollow.
They denied the path she'd taken even existed.
The shop where she'd found the journal was boarded up. Celia returned the next week. Rain followed her.
The well looked unchanged, but now there were footprints around it, bare, human, circling.
Fresh despite the downpour.
She left her tent unpacked, sat by the well, and waited. At sunset, she whispered again.
"What do you want?" This time it answered, not aloud but in her bones, in her mind.
"I want your voice. I want your name. I want your shadow.
Let me be you. Let me out." She couldn't move. The words crawled inside her. Dripping and cold, her limbs felt heavy, her vision dim. And then the rope returned, knotted neatly, coiled beside the well. She hasn't spoken since. Not because she won't.
Because she can't.
Every time she tries, another voice comes out.
Sometimes hers.
Sometimes something else's.
She doesn't remember her own face. Mirrors show nothing now.
And when she stands under streetlights, her shadow sometimes looks back at her with a grin too wide for any human mouth. The well is still there, waiting, whispering, pulling.
They say the village never existed. The land is just empty woods now. But if you follow the rain, if you listen in just the right moment of silence, you'll hear a voice behind your ear.
Let me be you.
And you'll start walking.
Not knowing why. Just toward the trees, toward the well.
Story 7. The light beneath the lake.
The lake wasn't on any of the maps.
That was the first thing Thomas noticed when he bought the cabin.
A faded place in the northern woods, 2 hours from any paved road, silent but for the wind in the birches. He'd inherited the property after the death of an uncle he never met, a man his family never spoke of, only muttered about. Quietly, after long silences, there was no electricity.
No phone line.
Just a generator that sputtered reluctantly and a cellar full of rotted supplies. The lake stretched out just past the tree line, wide and dark, cold even in the summer. On that first day, Thomas walked the edge of it and saw no fish, No birds, not even bugs on the surface. Just still, black water, quiet and smooth as oil.
That night, it rained. He sat on the porch and listened, the tin roof ticking softly overhead.
The lake was invisible in the dark, but he could smell it sharp and metallic, like something old and deep.
Then he saw the light, faint beneath the surface, a dull glow, shifting like fire through fog. It pulsed slowly, faint blue-white, then gone. He assumed it was lightning, dismissed it, but the next night it came again, and the next,
always when the rain fell hardest, always from the center of the lake.
He tried to ignore it,
but it grew stronger, brighter. Shapes began to appear, suggestions of motion beneath the water, like distant silhouettes whirling just under the surface. Something vast, something old.
Then came the dreams.
He dreamed of floating not on the surface, but within, eyes open, breath held, suspended in a glow.
There were other things around him in the water, slow-moving, long-limbed,
watching, waiting.
When he awoke, the smell of the lake clung to his clothes.
On the 5th day, he found footprints, bare, wet,
leading from the edge of the lake to his porch, then back again.
Thin, long-toed.
Too many joints.
He stopped sleeping after that. On the 6th night, he saw someone standing on the lake.
Not on a dock, there was none, but directly on the water, in the middle of the glowing light.
They didn't move. They simply stared.
Even from the shore, Thomas could see that their eyes were wrong to dark, too wide.
Their head tilted slowly, rhythmically, like a metronome.
Like listening. Then they sank not down, but in as if folded into the surface like fabric.
The light dimmed. The rain fell harder.
Thomas boarded the windows.
Tried to start the truck. It wouldn't budge. No signal on the radio.
No birds. No wind.
The lake grew louder in his head.
That night, the light came up to the surface.
Not beneath it anymore, not distant. It spilled out onto the shore, soaking the ground, crawling like mist.
He heard voices in it.
Not spoken, not sung. Thought, a single word repeated again and again in his skull. Join, he ran. But the trees moved wrong, too close, too dense. The path he'd cleared twisted back to the lake. Always to the lake.
At dawn, the light receded. He found his cabin changed.
Wet footprints circled the interior.
Water dripped from the ceiling. His bed was soaked.
In the mirror, his eyes looked clouded.
His breath smelled like brine.
He no longer dreams. He doesn't sleep. He just waits. On the 8th night, he walked to the lake. He didn't know why. The light was stronger than ever, reaching into the sky like a beacon. Shapes moved within it to many limbs. No faces. They parted as he approached the edge, welcoming.
He felt the pull in his chest. Not physical.
Deeper. Older.
He stepped in. The water swallowed him like breath.
There was no cold.
No resistance.
Just the hum of the light and the sensation like being remembered. Now the cabin is empty, but the lake is not. On rainy nights, if you listen closely, you might hear footsteps in the water. See the light blooming from beneath the surface, brighter than ever. Sometimes you see someone watching from the trees, pale-eyed and still, rain sliding off their skin without soaking it.
They wait for someone else to come.
The lake doesn't forget. It just waits for more.
Story 8. The 3rd floor room.
When Eliza took the job cataloging the Bellwether House archives, she was just looking for quiet.
It was a contract from the Historical Society, 8 weeks, a stipend, and a key to the estate.
Her task, to digitize and organize the contents of the Bellwether family's private library before the house was sold. The mansion stood on a ridge above the sea, isolated by thickets of twisted trees and near constant rain. No neighbors, no cell service, just the wind against the shutters and the distant moan of waves on the rocks below. She arrived in September. By October, the house had started to notice her. The ground floor was manageable. A wide foyer, parlor, dining room, all lined with dust and books. The 2nd floor had bedrooms locked in faded time, the air still perfumed with lavender and mildew. But the 3rd floor was different.
She found it on her 2nd week, hidden behind a narrow stairwell concealed by a bookshelf.
The steps were thinner than the rest, warped and groaning with each footfall. It led to a corridor that seemed too long for the house's dimensions. At the end, one door,
No knob, just a circular symbol burned into the wood. A spiral branching into 5 points.
She tried to open it. It didn't budge. The archives were stored in the attic below, so she left it alone.
At first, the work was peaceful.
Old letters, weathered photographs, books with handwritten annotations.
She pieced together a picture of the Bellwether family. Patriarch Aldrich, a collector of strange artifacts. His wife, Helena, whose letters hinted at a nervous temperament. And their daughter, Miriam, who vanished in 1919. No record of her death.
No burial. Only one entry in Helena's final diary, written days before her own disappearance.
She hears it too now.
The knocking.
The room wants her.
The room remembers. Eliza grew uneasy.
She began hearing things. Faint tapping overhead when she worked in the attic. Soft whispers beneath the sound of rain.
Always from above. Always from the 3rd floor room. She started dreaming of it. The spiral. The sound of something dragging behind the door. One night she dreamed of standing before the door and pressing her ear to it, and hearing herself on the other side, whispering, "Let me in."
On her 4th week, the door was open.
Just slightly. The spiral on the wood was faintly glowing, as if lit from within. She should have left then.
But curiosity is patient, and the house knew that.
She stepped inside. It was a small room, smaller than it should have been. Windowless, bare, just walls and floor, all the same pale, almost fleshy hue.
In the center, a chair facing the far wall.
And on that wall, scribbled in something black and oily, "Who were you before the house?" Eliza turned to leave.
The door was gone. The room stretched, not visibly, not suddenly, but she could feel it.
Like the walls were breathing.
The chair remained, now further away.
The writing on the wall had changed.
"Do you remember your name?" She screamed.
No one heard. Hours passed.
Or days. She couldn't tell. The room had no light, but she could see.
No time, but her body ached with exhaustion. Every time she turned, the writing changed. "You were not the first. You will not be the last."
There is no outside. Then came the knocking. From beneath the floor, soft, rhythmic,
as if something were calling up. The room grew colder,
not physically, but in thought.
Her memories began to unravel. Her name, her mother's face, the city she'd come from,
all softening.
And then, finally,
"Let us in." She woke in her bed,
covered in dust.
Her clothes smelled of mold.
It was still raining. She rushed upstairs. The 3rd floor stairway was gone. Only a blank wall remained where the bookshelf had been. She searched for days, found no sign of the corridor.
No record of the room. Only Helena's last note, which now read, "The house remembers."
She is its now. Eliza tried to leave, but the roads had flooded.
Her car refused to start.
The radio played only static with occasional bursts of her own voice whispering back at her. Now, at night, she hears knocking. Not on the walls. Not from beneath. From inside the mirror. Sometimes she sees someone else there wearing her face, but older, tired,
mouth moving silently.
Eliza still works the archives.
But she no longer writes her name, because the house has taken it.
And the 3rd floor room is waiting for someone else to forget who they were before it found them.
Story 9. The Toll House.
The rain was relentless the night Martin's car broke down.
He'd taken the old highway, trying to avoid the interstate closures. His phone had lost signal hours ago. There were no towns on his map for another 30 miles.
Just trees, soaked and sagging, pressing in on the narrow, crumbling road. That was when the sign appeared crooked and faded.
Toll House 1 mile.
It was strange.
He hadn't passed another car all evening. The route hadn't shown any tolls on the map. But then again, he hadn't seen this part of the map before.
The rain distorted everything. The lines, the letters. Even the world outside his windshield looked wrong, washed in a grey to thick for headlights.
Then the car sputtered, coughed, and died.
He coasted to the shoulder, tried the ignition twice. Nothing. The wind carried the sound of a bell.
Distant, hollow. Ahead, a pale glow flickered through the mist.
He walked. It was colder than it should have been. The rain felt greasy, like it clung too long to the skin. Every few steps, the wind carried a whisper, not words, but intent, like breath too close to the air. The house appeared at a bend in the road. It wasn't a modern toll booth, but an old wooden structure. 2 stories high, slouched behind iron gates.
The kind of place where men in cloaks once weighed coin by candlelight. A lantern burned in the window.
A bell sat on the desk inside.
No one around. He knocked.
No answer. The rain intensified, and the wind behind him howled. The forest suddenly felt too dark, too watchful. He stepped inside the house.
The bell on the desk rang without his touch.
He froze.
The door behind him closed.
Locked.
The room was older than the roads outside. Wood warped with age. Paint faded into bone-white streaks.
Shelves lined the walls, filled with odd objects. Buttons, teeth, old coins, lengths of hair wrapped in string. A large ledger lay open on the desk. It read, "Toll paid. Lillian H. Voice."
Toll paid. Edgar Militars. Memory of daughter. Toll paid. The liar W.
Both eyes. Martin backed away.
Another page turned.
Empty. Waiting. He turned to leave, but a voice came from the stairwell above. Dry. Flat. Neither male nor female.
You've taken the road. The road demands its toll.
Martin shouted that he had no money, that he didn't even know this place existed, that he just wanted to leave. Silence. Then quietly. Then offer what is owed.
The bell rang again.
This time he felt it in his head.
A sharp pulse, like something was being loosened. Suddenly, he couldn't remember his sister's name.
Panic set in.
He grabbed the door, still locked. The room began to hum.
Not with sound, but with pressure, like the house was inhaling around him. A presence descending the stairs without footsteps.
He ran up the second floor. The hallway was longer than it should have been.
Doors on either side.
Closed. The one at the far end was open, revealing a mirror. He stepped inside.
The mirror was full length, antique,
cracked in the corner.
but it didn't reflect him. Instead, it showed someone else, a child, maybe 6 years old, soaked and shivering, with wide eyes and a face he almost recognized. His own, but wrong, forgotten. He blinked.
The room changed. Now he stood in a classroom. Rows of old desks, dust swirling in still air.
A chalkboard behind him.
On it, what did you forget? A bell rang.
Not a school bell, the toll bell. Everything went dark.
When he awoke, he was outside again.
On the road,
the rain had stopped.
His car sat idling nearby, headlights on. He stumbled to it, drove,
didn't stop.
Not until he reached a diner hours later. Lit with the warm, unreal light of the living. He ordered coffee. The waitress asked for his name, and he didn't know. It wasn't just his name.
It was everything.
He couldn't remember his job, his home, his childhood. Just fragments.
Sounds, flashes of light on water.
The toll house, the ledger, the whisper.
Offer what is owed.
He checked his phone. No contacts, no photos. Just one note in his reminders APP. Time stamped at 3:06 a.m. You paid,
but you took the long road.
It'll come again.
He left the diner without finishing his drink. Now he wanders highways,
gas stations, truck stops,
looking for the house that took his memory, trying to trace the road he can't recall taking.
And sometimes when the rain falls heavy and the night is too quiet,
he hears the bell again.
Some tolls aren't paid in full. Some keep collecting.
Story 10. The lighthouse keeper's vigil.
The lighthouse stood alone at the edge of the world, a twisted sentinel clawing at the storm-racked cliffs.
Rain lashed the craggy rocks below like frozen needles, and the wind carried voices, or so Thomas thought as he climbed the rusted spiral stairs to the lantern room.
He was the new keeper.
The previous man had vanished 3 months ago, leaving only a note scrawled in trembling handwriting. The light will save me.
If it ever goes out, don't follow. The local council had brushed it off as a nervous breakdown, but Thomas was no stranger to solitude or storms. The first night, the wind screamed against the glass, and the rain hammered down in relentless sheets. The beacon swept across the jagged coastline, casting fractured shadows over the turbulent sea. Thomas listened to the weather, the creak of the tower, and the odd rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. On the second night, he noticed something odd. The light was dimmer, flickering like a candle in the wind.
He climbed the ladder to inspect the lamp's mechanics, but found nothing wrong.
Still, the flicker persisted.
When he glanced out over the waves, He thought he saw a faint glow beneath the water, just beyond the rocks, a pale shimmer, like a ghost's breath beneath the surface.
By the third night, the tapping had grown louder, a slow, deliberate rhythm like fingers drumming on wood.
Thomas tried to ignore it, chalking it up to fatigue or the old building settling. But when he turned to leave the lantern room, the heavy door slammed shut behind him.
He struggled with the latch, heart pounding, but it wouldn't budge.
Through the glass, the sea churned in unnatural patterns, twisting and folding into shapes that no ocean should make.
The fourth night, the rain fell heavier, thicker, almost viscous.
Thomas awoke to the faint smell of salt and something else. Something metallic, like blood mixing with the storm.
The lighthouse groaned, and the light sputtered again. In the mirror by the staircase, he caught a glimpse of something, a shadow, moving just behind him.
When he spun around, nothing was there. At dawn, he found scratches along the wood panels. Long gouges like claws had raked the surface. His hands shook as he traced the marks, and suddenly the tapping began again inside his skull.
The fifth night was the worst. The light died completely.
Darkness swallowed the lantern room, and with it, the storm seemed to stop.
The silence was absolute, pressing down like water. Thomas could hear his own breath, slow and shallow. Then, from below, a voice, low, guttural, whispering in a language he didn't understand but felt deep in his bones.
He tried the door, locked tight. The voice rose, becoming a chant surrounding him.
The walls pulsed. The light flickered on, illuminating the room in harsh white that threw twisted shadows. In the corner, something stirred. A shape, tall, thin, its eyes reflecting the lantern's glow.
Thomas couldn't move. It spoke, not with words, but with a feeling ancient, hungry, longing.
Keep the light. Keep us from the depths. The entity reached out, fingers brushing his face, cold as the ocean floor.
Thomas felt his mind fragment.
He remembered the previous keeper, and the warning note. The light was not a beacon for ships.
It was a barrier.
A prison, and the rain outside was not water. It was the sea trying to climb the cliffs.
Trying to reclaim the land. Thomas understood too late. The door unlocked. He ran down the stairs, breath ragged, heart pounding like thunder. Outside, the storm had stilled. The ocean was calm. But beneath the waves, something flickered. A dim light, passing, waiting. Thomas never left the lighthouse again.
Sometimes fishermen report seeing the beacon's light sweeping endlessly across the sea.
But no boat ever sees the shore. They say the keeper watches, eyes wide and unblinking,
guarding the thin line between storm and silence.
Between the known and the abyss.
And when the rain falls hardest, the light sometimes dies.
Only to return brighter.
More desperate.
Story 11. Whispers from the Fort.
The village of Greyhaven lay tucked deep in the valley, shrouded by towering cliffs and thick, unyielding fog.
It was a place the maps almost forgot, where the rain fell like a slow chant, soaking the earth and muffling all sound.
The air was always damp, heavy with the scent of moss and decay. Eleanor had come seeking quiet, hoping to escape the clamour of city life and the memories that haunted her every waking moment. She rented a small cottage on the outskirts, a crooked little building with peeling paint and windows that stared like tired eyes into the fog. On her first evening, as the rain drummed a steady rhythm against the roof, she noticed how the fog seemed to swallow sound voices, footsteps, even the crunch of her boots on gravel, fading into a thick silence that pressed on her ears.
It was as if the mist held its breath.
The village itself was nearly empty at night. Lights flickered behind shuttered windows, but no one seemed to walk the streets after dusk.
Eleanor's only companions were the steady drip of rain and the distant, eerie tolling of the old church bell, though the clock tower had been broken for decades.
She tried to reach the locals, but found their eyes vacant, their smiles forced and thin. When she asked about the fog, they changed the subject, casting furtive glances toward the cliffs. The next morning, Eleanor discovered something buried beneath the thick carpet of moss in the garden, a small stone carved with strange symbols, worn smooth by time. It was too deliberate to be natural.
That night, the fog rolled in heavier, denser.
Eleanor heard whispering voices, soft and breathless, just beyond the edge of her cottage.
They weren't words she could understand, but the tone was pleading, desperate.
She pressed her ear to the window, but the voices always seemed to drift away, carried off by the mist.
Sleep came reluctantly.
Her dreams were filled with shifting shadows and endless staircases spiraling into darkness. Sometimes she awoke feeling cold water on her skin, though the room was dry. Days passed. The whispers grew bolder. One evening, she wandered into the village square.
The fog wrapped around her like a living thing, thick and suffocating.
In the center, beneath the cracked statue of the town's founder, she saw a figure, a woman in a pale dress, her face obscured by long, wet hair. Eleanor called out. The figure turned. No eyes, just dark, empty hollows where her face should have been. The figure vanished into the mist. Terrified, Eleanor ran back to her cottage, locking every door and window, but the whispers followed her inside, slipping beneath the cracks, curling around her neck like cold fingers.
She found an old book in the village library, tattered and hidden behind a false panel. It spoke of the Vale of Greyhaven, an ancient curse born when the village had betrayed a presence in the cliffs, a spirit trapped beneath the earth, hungry for remembrance.
The fog was its breath, the whispers its call. The villagers were bound to it, guardians of its secret.
Eleanor understood then. The fog didn't just hide the village, it held it prisoner.
On the seventh night, the whispers turned into voices. She recognized her own voice, calling her name from outside. Compelled, she stepped into the fog.
The cold wrapped around her, pulling her down into silence. No one saw Eleanor leave the village.
The fog closed behind her, and sometimes on stormy nights, travelers report hearing faint whispers in the mist calling their names, beckoning them closer to the cliffs, where the earth hides its secrets beneath endless rain and silence.
Greyhaven waits.
And the fog listens.
Story 12. Beneath the Willow's Watch.
The village of Ash Hollow was small, a forgotten patch on a map where the river curved like a ribbon through dense woods and fields soaked in perpetual mist.
At its center, a great willow tree stood, ancient and gnarled, its branches swaying, even when the air was still, whispering secrets that only the rain seemed to understand. Marian arrived in early autumn, seeking refuge after a long stretch of restless nights and nameless fears. The locals had welcomed her with cautious smiles, their eyes lingering on the willow as if it guarded something none dared name.
She rented a modest cottage near the tree's sprawling roots, a place where the sound of the river mingled with the soft patter of rain on leaves. The days were slow, the village quieter than she expected, and the fog seemed to hold the world in a gentle, muffled embrace. But beneath the calm, something pulsed. The first sign was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of life. Birds vanished. The usual buzz of insects fell still. Even the river, usually gurgling over stones, seemed to hesitate as it passed beneath the willow's watchful limbs.
Marian noticed it first during her morning walks.
The tree's branches reached toward her like skeletal fingers, brushing her skin with a chill that went beyond the autumn air. At night, the rain drummed steadily, but there was a hollow rhythm beneath it, something slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat.
She found an old journal in the cottage's attic, its pages brittle with age and water stains.
It belonged to a woman named Elise, a former resident who wrote of dreams filled with shadowy figures and a presence beneath the tree. Elise's last entry was a frantic scrawl. It watches, waiting.
The roots whisper names, mine among them.
I cannot leave, not while the willow keeps its vigil. Marian dismissed it as superstition until the dreams began. Each night, she found herself standing beneath the willow, its branches alive with soft murmurs. Shadows twisted and shifted in the corner of her vision. A voice, faint and breathless, called her name, always just out of reach. The villagers grew wary. They told her to leave before the rains ended, before the willow's grasp tightened. One evening, during a particularly violent storm, Marian awoke to the sound of footsteps outside, heavy, deliberate, moving through the mud. She peered through the window to see a figure standing beneath the tree, a woman in a drenched cloak, face hidden beneath a hood. The figure didn't move, but seemed to pulse with the storm's rhythm. The willow's branches creaked and groaned as if alive, reaching down toward the figure. Marian felt a sudden compulsion, a pull she couldn't resist. She stepped outside, rain soaking through her clothes, and approached the tree. The air grew colder, the whispers grew louder. The figure raised its head. Its face was pale, almost translucent, eyes hollow wells of sorrow. Before Marian could speak, the willow's roots erupted from the ground, curling around her ankles like snakes. Pain blossomed as the roots pulled her down, dragging her toward a dark opening beneath the tree's trunk. Marian screamed, but the rain swallowed her voice. She struggled, but the roots tightened, pulling her deeper into the earth. Beneath the willow, the darkness was alive. It whispered names. It held memories. It claimed souls. Marian's last thoughts were of the river's cold embrace and the endless rain. When the villagers found her cottage the next morning, it was empty, save for the old journal lying open on a table. The final page read, "The willow watches. It waits, and soon it will call for you." The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, endless, and beneath the willow's watchful branches, the earth held its secrets tight. Story 13. The Last Stop. The bus arrived late, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain like desperate beams searching for shelter. Outside, the world was slick with water, every surface gleaming under the cold, relentless storm. Luke stepped off into the empty station, the hollow whistle of wind his only welcome. It was a forgotten place, a terminal wedge between the edges of nowhere and nowhere else. The timetable was faded, the benches cracked and damp. A single flickering streetlamp cast long shadows into the puddles, and the rain washed away any footprints that dared mark the ground. Luke had missed his connection. He'd been chasing a fresh start, running away from everything tangled in the past year of failed relationships, fractured family, the silence that gnawed at his mind. The rain outside was a physical weight, pressing on his chest with every breath. Inside the station, the air smelled of mildew and rust. The silence was thick, oppressive. No other passengers waited. No voices echoed of the tiled walls. Only the distant drip of water leaking from a cracked pipe somewhere above. Luke paced, running his hands over the chipped paint of the ticket counter, noticing the small details of faded flyer for a carnival from last summer. A cracked clock stuck at 11:13. The peeling paint revealing layers of forgotten names and dates scratched into the surface. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of letting up. He tried calling for a taxi, but the signal was gone. He tried to call a friend, but the number rang endlessly. The station's old payphone hung silent, disconnected. At some point, the rain seemed to slow, turning from the sharp patter of droplets to a dull, endless drizzle. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder, colder than rain should make it. Luke sat on a bench, pulling his jacket tighter, staring into the black pool of water collecting beneath the platform. That's when he heard the footsteps. Soft, measured, approaching. He looked up, but saw no one. The station was empty. Yet the sound persisted, growing closer, echoing from the tunnel where the trains never came. A chill ran down his spine. He stood, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows. "Hello," he called out. His voice felt foreign, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No reply. He moved toward the tunnel entrance. The darkness inside was thick, a void that seemed to absorb the weak station light. As he stepped in, the rain ceased entirely. The air was still, heavy with something unsaid. Further in, he spotted a figure, a man in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, face hidden beneath the brim of a cap, motionless. Luke froze. The figure's head tilted slowly. No eyes met his. Instead, a slow, mechanical smile spread beneath the shadow. "Last stop," the voice whispered, hollow and distant. Luke's breath caught. He turned to flee, but the tunnel shifted beneath his feet. The walls closed in, the lights dimmed. The rain returned not outside, but in his ears, a relentless static drowning out thought. The station faded, replaced by flickering images of lost faces, strangers trapped in the waiting room of forgotten time. Luke realized then, he wasn't waiting for a bus. He was waiting to become one of them. The rain outside blurred the world. The station was no longer a place. It was a trap, a liminal space where time folded and the last wandered endlessly. Luke's voice became another whisper swallowed by the storm, and the bus never came. Story 14.
The house beneath the ashes. Mara had never seen the forest so quiet.
The usual rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, even the hum of insects all stilled under the heavy, unyielding rain. It soaked the blackened ground, turning the earth to slick mud and puddles that shimmered with a cold, oily sheen.
The fire had come through weeks ago. Flames had swallowed the trees, reducing them to brittle ash and brittle skeletons reaching toward the bruised sky like pleading hands.
Mara's arrival wasn't planned.
She'd come to survey the damage, to find any signs of life, to understand what had killed this place. She found the house almost immediately, half buried beneath layers of ash and fallen branches. Its frame was twisted and charred, windows shattered and blackened, yet it stood stubbornly against the storm.
Inside, the air was thick with smoke and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like blood mixed with burnt sugar. The walls were scarred with deep gouges, like claws had raked the plaster, leaving jagged, blackened trails.
Mara moved cautiously, her flashlight slicing through the smoky haze.
In the corner, a heap of charred furniture surrounded a cracked mirror. She caught her reflection for a moment, a pale face framed by damp hair, eyes dark with exhaustion and something closer to fear. There was a whisper in the silence. She froze.
The rain outside was steady, a constant patter like a heartbeat. Then a soft scrape. From beneath the floorboards, Mara dropped to her knees, pushing aside the debris.
The wood was warped and brittle, but moved enough to reveal a narrow space beneath the house, a stairwell descending into darkness.
She hesitated.
The air smelled colder here, sharper.
Still, she climbed down. The basement was small, damp, and lined with shelves full of rusted tools and jars filled with murky liquid. But at the far end, a door hung open, leading to a room that had somehow survived the fire, its walls coated in soot but intact.
Inside the room stood an altar. Candles, melted to grotesque shapes, surrounded a twisted sculpture made from bone and ash.
Mara's breath caught as she noticed the faint outline of handprints smudged and smeared in a thick, sticky residue on the floor.
The residue glistened faintly. She stepped closer. The floor beneath her shifted. Suddenly, the candle flames flared to life, though no breeze stirred.
The altar pulsed with a faint, unnatural glow. A voice whispered,
soft, terrible, pulling. Remember, Mara felt a pressure against her mind, like a tide trying to pull her under.
Memories flickered faces she didn't recognize, screams that weren't hers, eyes staring back from the darkness beneath the ash.
The rain outside grew louder, beating against the walls as if it sought to drown a sound. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't move. The whispers grew louder. Remember what you buried. In a flash, the truth exploded inside her. She remembered the fire, not as a survivor, but as the cause. The sacrifice made to silence the thing beneath the house. The pact broken.
The ashes were not the end. They were the beginning.
The house trembled. The shadows pulled in the corners.
Mara felt the ground open beneath her. Cold fingers wrapped around her ankles, pulling her down. The rain outside turned to a scream.
And the house beneath the ashes waited for its next visitor.
Story 15. Echoes of Ravenswood.
Ravenswood Manor loomed on the hill like a brooding titan, its stone walls slick with rain and stained by time. The sky hung low and heavy, dripping cold sheets that blurred the edges of the world into a dark watercolor. Each gust of wind pushed rain sideways, weaving through the gnarled branches of skeletal trees and slipping into the manor's broken windows like whispers.
Isabel had returned after decades away, drawn by a letter whose ink had faded almost to nothing but still carried a weight she could not ignore.
The letter was unsigned, but unmistakably hers in handwriting, and intent to call from the past, she thought, lay buried beneath layers of grief and silence. She arrived in the early evening, the rain swallowing the sound of her footsteps on the gravel drive. The heavy front door hung ajar, creaking softly as if breathing. Inside, the manor smelled of damp stone and forgotten memories. Rooms stretched into shadows, corridors spiraling like a labyrinth through peeling wallpaper and broken chandeliers.
The air was thick with dust and something else, an undercurrent of sorrow and something darker, like a pulse beneath the skin of the house.
Isabel set down her bags. heart tightening as she traced the faded wallpaper patterns, the cracked porcelain of long empty vases.
The rain outside tapped steadily against the windows, a rhythm as unyielding as the manor itself. As night deepened, the house seemed to wake. Floorboards groaned beneath invisible weight.
Curtains fluttered with no breeze.
Faint, almost imperceptible sounds echoed from the depths, whispers, murmurs, the soft scrape of claws or nails against wood.
Isabel tried to tell herself it was the wind, the rain,
her imagination,
but the whispers grew clearer, voices calling names she hadn't heard since childhood.
Fragments of old stories, half remembered and bitter as the storm.
She explored the manor's heart, descending into the cellar where darkness poured thick and cold.
There, beneath the cracked stone floor, she found the remnants of an old well, its black depths swallowing the weak light of her flashlight.
A journal lay near the edge, water-stained and brittle. Isabel opened it, reading the hurried scrawls of her great-grandfather. A man whispered about in village lore as much for his brilliance as his madness. The entry spoke of a creature beneath the manor, a presence born from the shadows of the woods, feeding on fear and loss, growing stronger with every soul tethered to Ravenswood.
A final, frantic passage chilled her blood. The rain is not mercy, it is the curse. It binds us to the dark.
If the light goes out, the echoes will claim us all. Isabel felt the weight of those words as the storm outside intensified, rain hammering like a relentless drum. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The manor plunged into suffocating darkness. In that blackness, the whispers became screams. Shadows twisted into forms, shapes without faces, eyes glinting like dying stars.
They surrounded her, pressing closer.
She fumbled for a candle, the flame trembling as it cast fragile light. The figures recoiled.
One voice, deeper and colder than the rest, spoke.
"You cannot run. Ravenswood remembers." Isabel ran, heart pounding, through winding halls that twisted unnaturally, doors appearing where none had been, walls breathing with the pulse of the storm.
The rain's rhythm echoed in her ears, a dark lullaby promising no escape.
In the grand hall, she found the old grandfather clock frozen at midnight.
With trembling hands, she wound it, the ticking beginning anew.
Light seeped back into the room. The shadows recoiled into the walls, their whispers fading to breathless silence. Isabel collapsed, soaked and shivering, as the storm outside softened to a dull drizzle.
But as dawn broke, a faint tapping began behind the walls, slow, deliberate, like a warning.
Ravenswood Manor was never truly silent. It waited, and in the rain, its echoes whispered still.
Story 16. The Lighthouse Keeper's Vigil. The sea was a restless beast, its waves pounding endlessly against the jagged rocks that cradled the lighthouse.
Rain drummed a ceaseless tattoo against the glass, a steady, cold percussion that filled the night with a relentless rhythm. The wind howled like a mournful ghost, twisting through the crevices and rattling the rusted metal of the lighthouse's spiral staircase. For Thomas, the lighthouse keeper, this storm was nothing new. He had spent years here, on this isolated promontory, tending the light that guarded ships from the deadly cliffs below. The rain was a familiar companion, its chill, its sound a constant reminder of his vigil and the thin line between salvation and destruction. But tonight, something was different. The light flickered once, twice, a stuttering heartbeat in the darkness. Thomas climbed the stairs to the lantern room, rainwater dripping from his coat, eyes scanning the furious sea beyond. The beacon pulsed weakly, a pale halo barely cutting through the storm.
He reached for the controls.
Nothing. The switch refused to engage. The light was dying. A sinking weight settled in his chest. Outside, the sea seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it sensed the faltering guard. Thomas returned to the keeper's room. The warmth of the small stove a fragile comfort against the cold. He lit a candle and opened a leather-bound logbook. Its pages yellowed and worn. The previous entries told stories of storms, shipwrecks, strange lights, and voices heard carried on the wind whispers from the sea, or from those lost beneath its depths. Tonight, Thomas's own handwriting was hesitant, almost fearful. He wrote, "The light falters, the storm grows fierce, shadows crawl beneath the waves. I feel watched." Outside,
The rain intensified, battering the lighthouse walls with desperate fury. Then came the first knock.
Soft, tentative.
At the heavy wooden door, Thomas froze.
No one should be here, no visitors came in such weather. The knock came again, insistent but quiet.
With trembling hands, he opened the door.
The storm seemed to pause. No one stood outside.
Only wet footprints bare and dragging leading away toward the cliff. Thomas's heart hammered.
He grabbed his coat and lantern and followed. The path was slippery, twisting along the edge of the precipice. The rain blurred the world into a grey haze, swallowing shapes and sounds. The footprints led to a narrow cave entrance, dark and yawning like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The cave walls glistened with seawater, dripping steadily in the pitch black. Deeper in, he found something unnatural. A figure, hunched and cloaked in dripping seaweed, eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light.
It spoke without moving its lips.
You failed the light.
Thomas felt a cold rush flood through him.
The figure's face shifted, revealing nothing but a dark abyss where features should have been.
A whispered tide of voices rose from the shadows, echoing up the cave wall's laughter, cries and warnings from those lost to the sea.
The figure reached out, cold fingers brushing Thomas's cheek.
Now, the storm would claim you too. He fled, stumbling out of the cave into the rain. Behind him, the sea roared louder, waves crashing like thunder.
Back at the lighthouse, the beacon was dark.
Thomas tried again to ignite the light, but the switch remained dead.
He lit more candles, their fragile flames flickering against the storm's fury.
As the night deepened, the whispers returned not from the cave, but from within the walls.
Voices calling.
The rain pressed against the glass like a living thing, seeking entry. Thomas sat in silence, a prisoner of the storm and the shadows it summoned. He understood now. The light was not just a warning to others.
It was his tether. Without it, the darkness would pull him under.
The dawn was slow to come. When it did, the storm had passed, leaving only silence and whetstones.
The lighthouse stood empty.
And somewhere beneath the cliffs, the sea waited.
Always waiting.
Story 17. The walls remember.
The rain had been falling for days, turning the dirt paths into rivers of mud and swallowing the world in a cold grey fog. Elwood Asylum stood on the outskirts of town, long since closed, but never forgotten.
Its broken windows stared out like empty eye sockets, and the iron gates hung crooked, creaking with every gust of wind.
Evelyn arrived just as the storm thickened, drawn by a mixture of professional curiosity and something darker, an art she couldn't quite name.
As a psychologist, she had studied the asylum's history. The whispered tales of patients lost to madness, the experimental treatments that left scars deeper than the skin, the disappearances no one spoke of openly.
Her job was to document,
to understand, to bring light to places where darkness thrived. But Elmwood had its own plans.
She crossed the threshold, the heavy door groaning as it swung open, revealing a vast, dimly lit lobby where peeling wallpaper hung in strips and the scent of mildew and old medicine lingered like a warning.
The rain pattered relentlessly against the broken panes, each drop echoing in the silence. Evelyn moved slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom.
The air was thick, heavy with memories that clung like cobwebs. Every step stirred something, a faint whisper, a shifting shadow just beyond the light.
She reached the ward where patients had been kept, rows of rusted beds lined against cracked walls.
The names of the long-gone residents were scratched into the paint, their stories fading but never gone.
She paused before a door marked Room 17, the room rumored to have housed the asylum's most troubled patient.
Inside, the air was colder, the walls blotched with dark stains and scratches as if the very stone remembered pain.
Suddenly, a low moan drifted through the corridor.
Evelyn's breath hitched.
She turned, shining her light down the hall.
Nothing.
Then the whisper came again, clearer, a soft voice repeating her name. She felt a presence, heavy and close. Her pulse quickened. The flashlight flickered.
Shadows swirled, forming shapes, faces contorted in silent screams, reaching hands desperate for release. Evelyn forced herself to breathe, grounding in the present.
She made her way deeper into the asylum, drawn by an unspoken need to uncover the truth.
In the basement, she found the treatment room, instruments rusted but still ominous. A journal lay on a table, waterlogged but readable. It belonged to Dr. Halstead, the asylum's lead psychiatrist, whose notes revealed a descent into obsession experiments to cure madness that blurred the line between science and cruelty.
The final entry chilled her. They speak to me through the walls. Their pain is eternal. I fear I have become one with their torment.
Suddenly, the flashlight died. Evelyn was swallowed by darkness. The rain sound was distant now, replaced by a chorus of whispers and cries. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in, hands pressed against her skin, cold and insistent.
Her mind fractured, memories folding over like waves breaking on jagged rocks.
The asylum's horrors were not past, they were alive, and they remembered. Evelyn screamed into the dark, but no one answered. Only the rain outside continued, soft and unending, masking the echoes within.
Story 18. Beneath the endless rain. The rain had fallen without cease for weeks, thick and unyielding. It clung to the stone walls of the village like a shroud, muffling voices and blurring edges until the world outside seemed a shifting dream of water and shadow. Roads had turned to mud, the river swollen and wild, swallowing the bridges that once connected the scattered homes. Elias arrived in Black Hollow with a single purpose: to find the truth about the village's recent disappearances, whispered about in hushed tones at the city's edges. Officially, no one could explain why people vanished without a trace, why the night was filled with strange sounds, or why the rain seemed to carry a weight heavier than water. He had come for answers.
The village lay silent beneath the storm. Even the usual sounds of animals were absent, replaced by the constant drip of rainwater from eaves and the occasional distant rumble of thunder.
Elias moved carefully down narrow, twisting alleys, each step sinking into the mud.
The houses leaned close together, their windows dark and empty, like watchful eyes that refused to see.
At the center of Black Hollow stood the church, its spire piercing the grey sky.
The wooden door was swollen shut from moisture, but a side window was broken, shards of glass glinting like teeth.
Inside, the air was cold and still. Candles long burnt out left blackened holders, and the pews were covered in a thick layer of dust and damp.
On the altar, a carved stone basin was filled not with holy water, but with rain collected through cracks in the ceiling, dark and murky. Elias's flashlight flickered as he explored, and he noticed strange symbols etched into the stone walls, ancient marks, worn but deliberate. The rain outside intensified, drumming a heavy rhythm. Suddenly, a faint chanting echoed from the depths below the church.
Drawn by the sound, Elias found a trapdoor hidden beneath a faded rug.
He pried it open and descended a narrow staircase into darkness thick with moisture and rot. At the bottom, a cavernous chamber stretched beyond the reach of his light.
Figures cloaked in soaked robes moved silently around a central pit filled with black water, their voices rising in a low, unbroken chant. As he watched, one of the figures dipped a hand into the water and lifted a small, writhing creature, something not entirely animal, not entirely human, before it disappeared beneath the surface.
Elias's breath caught. The chanting grew louder, resonating with the pounding rain above. The villagers were not victims. They were participants.
The pit was a well of something older than memory, an ancient offering to the restless waters that devoured the land. Suddenly, the chanting stopped.
The figures turned slowly toward the staircase, eyes pale and unblinking, fixed on him.
Elias fled upward, mud slipping beneath his feet as the rain outside became a roaring flood.
The village seemed to close in around him, doors slammed, windows shattered, shadows stretching like fingers.
He reached the surface just as the first light of dawn began to bleed through the storm clouds.
But Black Hollow was gone. Only the endless rain remained, washing away footprints, memories, and all traces of what had transpired.
Elias stood alone in the deluge, knowing the water held secrets it would never release, and beneath it, something waited.
Waiting beneath the endless rain.
Story 19. The clockmaker's silence. Rain fell in relentless sheets, washing the narrow streets of Greyhaven in cold silver.
The sky was a canvas of dense, shifting clouds, their grey depths pressing down as if intent on crushing the world beneath. The clock tower, once the town's proudest monument, loomed silent and still, its hands frozen at midnight. Jonas arrived under the weight of the storm. The brim of his soaked hat pulled low against the rain. The town was abandoned, or so it seemed. Windows stared blank and empty. Doors hung loosely on rusted hinges, and the air was thick with a damp stillness that felt unnatural, oppressive.
He had come for answers.
For months, letters had arrived at his workshop, odd, cryptic messages signed only the keeper. They spoke of time unraveling, of a silence swallowing sound, and of a presence waiting in the dark. Jonas crossed the cracked cobblestones toward the clock tower, each footfall swallowed by the rain's steady drum. He paused at the base, gazing up at the massive clock face where the hands were frozen, casting long, ghostly shadows over the wet stones. Inside, the tower was steeped in gloom. The air smelled of rust, oil, and forgotten years. Dust motes floated in his flashlight beam as he climbed the spiraling staircase, each step creaking beneath his weight. On the landing, he found the clock's mechanism an intricate labyrinth of gears and cogs, now silent and motionless.
The brass gleamed faintly despite the decay, as if waiting.
Jonas reached out to touch the winding key, his fingers trembling. A whisper stirred.
Soft and cold, like a breath against his neck.
"Don't wind the time again."
He spun around.
Empty stairwell. Only the rain's steady tapping echoed faintly through the cracked windows. He shook off the chill and turned back to the mechanism.
At that moment, the hands on the clock twitched, then jerked violently backward. The world shuddered. Outside, the rain shifted the steady rhythm becoming irregular, a discordant beat that warped the silence.
Jonas felt the air grow heavier, denser. The shadows in the room lengthened unnaturally, crawling along the walls. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the foot of the stairs, a man in tattered clothes, face obscured beneath a dripping hood.
"Time is broken here," the stranger whispered, voice hollow and distant.
Jonas's heart raced. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure lifted a pale hand.
The keeper of forgotten moments.
He stepped forward, and the world seemed to warp, walls bending, light bending, the rain outside turning into a thunderous roar that drowned all else. Jonas felt himself pulled into a spiral of memories, not his own faces flickering like candle flames, lost hours, and silent screams trapped between ticks of a broken clock.
He realized then that Greyhaven was not a place. It was a moment frozen, trapped in an endless loop by something unseen and terrible. The rain outside fell harder, each drop a note in a mournful dirge. Jonas tried to resist, but the silence grew. The stranger's eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood. "Some moments never end," he said, "and some silence is forever." As the clock hands struck midnight again, Jonas vanished into the shadows of the tower, his footsteps swallowed by the rain. Greyhaven remained waiting, silent, and lost beneath the ceaseless storm. Story 20. The Last Light of Willow's End.
The rain never stopped. For as long as anyone could remember, Willow's End had been drenched in a perpetual downpour. The grey sky pressed close, heavy with sorrow, its endless tears washing over the cracked streets and sagging rooftops. Even the trees bowed beneath the weight of moisture, their branches slick and brittle.
Mara had returned to Willow's End after 20 years away.
The village was the only place she'd ever called home. Though memories of it were tangled with shadows she wished she could forget. The letter that brought her back was unsigned, its words vague but urgent as summons from a past that refused to rest. She arrived on a night when the rain was at its fiercest, the world outside a blur of silver streams cascading from gutters and trees. The old railway station, once the village's lifeline, stood empty and drowned in darkness.
A flickering lantern hung from a rusted hook, casting fragile light onto puddles that rippled with every drop.
Mara's boots splashed as she moved through the streets, each step echoing in the hollow silence. Houses leaned close together, their windows dark and lightless.
Somewhere deep inside, a clock struck the hour, its melancholy chime swallowed by the storm. She made her way to the edge of town, where the cliffs met the relentless sea.
The lighthouse still stood, a sentinel battered by wind and rain, its beacon extinguished long ago. As she approached, A figure emerged from the mist, a man cloaked in soaked fabric, face hidden beneath a dripping hood.
"You shouldn't be here," he said, voice rough like gravel. Marat's throat tightened.
I had to come.
He nodded slowly. The rain never ends because the past won't let go.
Together, they climbed the spiraling stairs of the lighthouse, the wind howling through broken panes and shattered glass. At the top, the old lantern room was a tomb of rust and peeling paint, the great glass windows stained with salt and time.
The man turned to her, revealing eyes dull with exhaustion. "It's not just the storm, it's the sorrow trapped here woven into the very stones." Marat reached out, touching the cold metal of the lantern's frame.
A shiver ran through her as memories flooded back laughter last 2 years, promises broken beneath this endless rain, and a secret buried deep beneath the waves. Suddenly, the rain seemed to pause. The sea quieted. The clouds parted just enough to reveal a single shaft of pale moonlight piercing the darkness. The lantern flickered once, twice, and then burst into flame, casting a golden glow that filled the room.
Marat gasped as the wall shimmered and faded, replaced by scenes from the past. A child playing in the sunshine, lovers walking hand in hand, a village alive with light and warmth.
The man whispered, "The light is a memory."
A last hope.
But the vision cracked and fractured like broken glass. The rain returned with a fury, the storm swallowing the light once more.
Marat felt the weight of the years press down. She knew the truth now.
Willow's End was a place caught between worlds,
a fragment of time held hostage by grief and regret. The rain was not mercy.
It was a curse, and the light, though brief, was a reminder that some sorrows never fade, they only wait, patient and relentless, beneath the last light of a dying world.
As the storm closed in again, Marat stood alone, the lighthouse once more a dark sentinel against the endless rain. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the past whispered its eternal vigil.
Thanks for listening. If you made it to the end, let me know which story chilled you the most.